Millionaire CEO ignores street vendor, but one freed egg with rice changed his life forever. He never imagined her life would change because of a plate of fried egg and rice. In a city that never noticed her, she stood behind her tiny food cart, serving strangers who never cared to ask her name. And then came him. The man with cold eyes and a heart locked behind steel walls. She thought he was just another customer. She didn't know he was one of the wealthiest men in America. And he never told her. Not when he fell in love with her smile. Not when he invested in her dream. But tonight, under the blinding lights of her greatest triumph, the truth would finally tear them apart. Because loving someone means trusting who they really are, and he had lied since the very first plate. The city hummed like it always did, alive, electric, and completely indifferent. Emma Martinez tightened the faded scarf around her neck as the early spring wind sliced through downtown Seattle. The sun had barely risen, and already the sidewalks pulsed with sharp heels and expensive shoes, coffee cups in hand, designer coats brushing past like she was invisible. And most days, she was. Her tiny food cart stood stubbornly on Lincoln Avenue, wedged between towering glass buildings that reached into the sky like cold steel giants. The same spot she'd been fighting to hold on to for 2 years now. Simple, unremarkable. A flat griddle, a faded umbrella barely shielding her from the drizzle, and a handwritten sign that read, "Fried rice and egg, made with heart." Every morning, she flipped rice onto the griddle, letting the smell of sizzling garlic and onions drift into the air. She'd wake the street up before the city's alarms could. It was all she had, this cart, her hands, and her will. She didn't serve gourmet meals. She served something more sacred. Comfort, made one plate at a time. But today was different. Today, her eyes caught him again, like they always did. The man with the perfect suit. The man who never stopped. The man who never looked at her. He walked past her cart every single morning. Same time, same steady steps, same distant eyes. His coat sharp, his tie perfect, his posture unshakable. She didn't know his name. She didn't have to. In her mind, she called him Mr. Fancy Tie. And like every day, she smiled anyway. "Morning, Mr. Fancy Tie," she called out, flipping the rice high into the air, catching it like a practiced dancer. He never answered, never even turned. His eyes were always glued to his phone, his watch, or the endless skyline ahead of him. But this morning, something flickered. Or as he passed, she swore, just for a breath, that his pace faltered, a small hesitation like his legs argued with his mind, and for a second she saw it, exhaustion written beneath the cold, the kind of exhaustion that no amount of wealth could cover. He kept walking, and the moment slipped away like vapor. Emma sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her, the small apartment she shared with her sister waited barely affordable, barely standing, but safe. Sophia's scholarship payments were due again, and Emma had scraped every tip to cover the balance. She always did. Because Sophia would become a doctor, no matter how hard Emma had to work. By noon, the lunch crowd hit. Bank clerks, assistants, taxi drivers, all flocking for her simple plate. Warm, golden rice, garlic so fragrant it was practically illegal, and that perfectly fried egg with crispy edges and a creamy center. "You make it with love, that's why it tastes better," old Mr. Howard from the flower shop always said. But the man with the fancy tie? He never stopped, not once. Until that night. The wind howled louder as the city emptied. The glass towers dimmed one by one, and the rain finally arrived like it always did. Cold, sharp, relentless. Emma was packing up when she heard it. A deep, low growl. At first, she thought it was thunder, but when she turned, she realized it was him. Standing there, barely under the awning, his hand pressed to his stomach like a man who hadn't eaten in days. His suit was still immaculate, but his eyes gave him away. Hollow, tired, starving. The air filled with the scent of fresh rice and garlic. She had just finished one last plate for herself, the smell wrapping around them like invisible hands pulling him closer. For the first time, their eyes met. "You look like someone starving," Emma said gently, her voice teasing, her smile warm. He straightened his tie, forcing his pride to hold. "I don't eat street food." Almost poetic, as if the words physically hurt him. But then his stomach betrayed him, growling so loudly that a stray dog across the street barked. Emma couldn't help herself. She laughed, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something crack behind those guarded eyes. "Your stomach seems to disagree, Mr. Fancy Tie." He inhaled sharply, his jaw tight, and then, finally, like a dam giving way. "Fine. Make one." Emma's grin lit up the dark corner. She worked quickly, her hands dancing over the hot griddle, tossing rice, adding garlic, letting the soy sauce kiss the pan until it sizzled like rain on fire. Finally, she cracked an egg, letting it fall perfectly onto the center. "You want it spicy?" she asked, voice light. "Not too much." His arms were crossed, but the tension in his shoulders had softened. "Relax, Mr. Fancy Tie," she smiled again. "This is rice, egg, and dignity on a plate." He watched her with surprising intensity, as if memorizing every motion, and when she handed him the container, she noticed how careful he was, like it was something fragile. He stepped away to eat in private, but Emma watched from the cart, biting her lip as he took his first bite. And then she saw it happen. The world seemed to stop for him. His eyes closed, his shoulders exhaled. It wasn't just food, it was something deeper. It was a memory. Something inside him thawed, even if he didn't understand it yet. And as he wiped his mouth, pretending to stay composed, Emma couldn't resist. "Well, what do you think?" He cleared his throat, trying to fake indifference. "It's acceptable." But his stomach betrayed him again, loudly. Emma laughed, leaning forward with a wink. "Should I make another plate, Mr. Fancy Tie, or do you need to argue with your stomach some more?" His pride cracked once more, and this time, he whispered the words that would begin everything. "One more." Chapter 1. The Egg and Rice That Changed My Life. The following morning, the drizzle returned. It was that typical Seattle rain, not violent but steady, as if the sky simply refused to let the city dry. Emma arrived early, her breath visible in the crisp air as she set up her cart. The world was still waking, but inside her something was already different. Last night replayed like a scene she couldn't stop watching. The cold, polished man, the pride he swallowed, the way his eyes had briefly closed when he tasted her simple rice and egg, and the way he whispered, almost defeated, "One more." Emma smiled to herself, shaking her head as she lit the griddle. She didn't expect him to come back. Men like him didn't belong in her world, a world of cracked sidewalks, second-hand coats, and plastic utensils. But then again, life had surprised her before. By 6:15 a.m., her first customers trickled in. Familiar faces she saw every morning. A bus driver grabbing breakfast before his route, a young nurse on her way to the hospital, a construction worker who always joked that her rice kept him going longer than his paycheck. Emma served them all with practiced ease, her hands moving like they belonged to someone who had done this for years. And she had. Behind her, the photo of Sophia was taped to the inside wall of the cart. Her little sister's bright, determined eyes reminded Emma why she woke up at dawn every morning. "Someday, kiddo," Emma whispered softly, "you'll be a doctor, and I'll finally breathe." Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Sophia, morning, Em. Good luck today, don't forget. Rain means more customers. Love you." Emma smiled. She needed that. At 6:30 sharp, her gaze drifted toward the corner out of habit. That's when she saw him. Same suit, same steady steps, same unbothered air. But today, something had shifted. Henry Brooks, though she still didn't know his name, paused. For a full second, his polished shoes halted on the wet pavement. His eyes lifted from his phone, and, for the first time, he looked directly at her. Their eyes locked. Emma raised her spatula slightly in greeting. "Morning, Mr. Fancy Tie." A faint, almost imperceptible twitch pulled at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't nothing either. Henry inhaled, breaking the moment with a glance at his watch before continuing down the street. No words, no detour. Emma exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Didn't expect him to come back," she mumbled to herself, "but at least he remembered I exist." But the real surprise came that evening. The rain had turned heavier as the city darkened. Many vendors had already packed up, but Emma stayed longer. She couldn't afford short days. Every dollar mattered. The streets glistened under the streetlights, the wet asphalt reflecting the city's neon heartbeat. And then she saw him again. This time, he wasn't just passing by. Henry stood across the street, staring at her cart from under a sleek black umbrella. The rain pattered gently on its surface, his reflection wavering in the puddles below. Emma's pulse quickened. He stepped off the curb. Each stride was deliberate, like he was walking into something far more dangerous than traffic. When he reached her cart, Emma wiped her hands on her apron and offered a small smile. "Back for more?" Henry adjusted his tie, as if buying time. "You're open?" "I am," she gestured toward the griddle, still hot and ready. "And you're standing here, which tells me your stomach won the argument again." He exhaled through his nose, eyes scanning the cart like it was some foreign, unsanitary battlefield. "Same as last night?" she asked gently. He paused. "Add a little more garlic." Emma blinked. That was new. "Garlic? You sure?" He nodded once. "It's comforting." That word. Comforting. She didn't expect that word to come from him. Not from a man whose entire existence seemed built on control. Emma moved quickly, flipping the rice onto the griddle, stirring it with practiced precision. The garlic hit the hot oil and sang its familiar song, filling the space between them with warmth. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Henry said quietly, "You call me Mr. Fancy Tie. Why?" Emma bit back a grin. "Because you dress like you're heading to a Fortune 500 meeting, even when you're buying rice on the street." "That's accurate." She glanced at him. "You never told me your real name." He hesitated for a split second. "Henry." No last name, no further details. "Nice to meet you, Henry," she said softly, sliding the finished plate toward him. "I'm Emma." He took the container, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. And just like last night, he stepped a few feet away, out of view, as if needing privacy for something as vulnerable as eating. But Emma saw it anyway. The way his shoulders dropped, the way his breathing slowed, the way that first bite made him close his eyes for just a second too long. It wasn't just food, Emma realized. It was escape. He returned to the cart after finishing, container spotless. "Good?" she asked. Henry adjusted his tie again, his nervous tell she was beginning to notice. "Acceptable." She laughed, shaking her head. "You really need to work on your compliments." As he reached for his wallet, Emma waved her hand. "Tonight's on the house." Henry froze. "Why?" "Because I think you needed it more than I did." For a moment, his face softened. Not the cold, sharp lines of the CEO he was in his world, but something far more human. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the mask returned. He placed a crisp bill on the counter. "Anyway, I pay for what I consume." Emma didn't argue. She knew better than to challenge a man's pride too directly. As he turned to leave, she called after him, voice playful but sincere. "Come back any time, Henry." He paused for half a second, then continued walking into the rain, his silhouette melting into the glowing city lights. Chapter 2. Secrets served with every plate. Henry Brooks sat in his corner office, 34 stories above the city. From this high, Seattle looked different. Smaller, more manageable, almost quiet beneath the sheets of steady spring rain. His desk was immaculate, every object placed with surgical precision. The Mont Blanc pen angled perfectly beside the contract he hadn't signed yet, the digital clock softly ticking, and the untouched cup of espresso that had already gone cold. But his thoughts weren't on the billion-dollar merger sitting in front of him. They were on her. Emma. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't planned for her. Henry prided himself on control, on knowing outcomes before decisions were made. That's why Brooks Industries had become one of the most dominant private investment firms on the West Coast, because Henry Brooks didn't allow himself to feel. And yet, one plate of egg and rice and she'd slipped through the cracks of his carefully constructed life. Her smile haunted him. Her warmth cut through his cold world like sunlight streaming through high-rising glass. And the way her hands moved across that simple food cart, with intention, with care, like every plate she served carried a piece of her soul. He ran a hand across his jaw, exhaling deeply. You shouldn't have gone back last night. But he had. And the worst part? He was already planning to go again. By the time evening rolled around, Henry found himself standing at the same intersection, umbrella shielding him from the drizzle as he watched her work. This time, he didn't hesitate. "Evening, Henry," Emma said the moment she saw him, as if she'd been waiting. He noticed the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her smile playful but uncertain. "You remembered my name," he said quietly. "Of course. It's not every day a man in a $1,000 suit orders street food twice in 2 days." Henry's lips almost curved into a smile. Almost. "Same order?" she teased, already cracking the egg. "Yes, and a little extra garlic like last night." They slipped into a rhythm, unspoken but natural. For several minutes the only sounds were the soft hiss of the griddle, the patter of rain, and the rhythmic clinks of her spatula against metal. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "You work nearby?" Henry paused. It was a simple question, an innocent one, but not for him. Not far. "What do you do?" Henry's eyes flickered. He could tell her the truth, but if he did, everything would change. "Administration," he said smoothly. "I handle business operations, contracts, paperwork." "Ah," Emma nodded, flipping the rice effortlessly. "You're one of those suit and tie paperwork warriors." "You could say that." Emma laughed softly. "Well, at least you get to sit indoors. Out here I battle the rain, wind, and every pigeon in the city." Her laugh warmed something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. "You ever consider expanding?" he asked suddenly. "Opening a restaurant?" Emma blinked, surprised by his interest. "Of course," she admitted, her voice softer now. "It's my dream. My sister and I talk about it all the time. A small place, cozy. Nothing fancy, just real food, comfort food, like what I make here." She paused, gaze drifting to the small photo taped behind her, Sophia's graduation picture. Henry followed her eyes. "Your sister?" "Yeah." Emma smiled, with a different kind of pride now, one that came from love, not survival. "Sophia's finishing high school. Wants to be a doctor. She's brilliant." Henry studied her carefully. The fierce devotion in her voice wasn't for show. It was who she was. "You're raising her?" Emma shrugged, though her shoulders tensed for a moment. "Since our mom passed, our dad left long before that." Henry's throat tightened unexpectedly. There was so much strength in this woman, so much resilience. "You're remarkable," he said before he could stop himself. Emma's cheeks flushed. "You don't even know me." "Not yet," he said softly. For a moment, their eyes locked. The world shrank. The noise of the city faded. All that remained was the warmth of garlic in the air, the quiet drizzle falling around them, and something unspoken humming in the space between their words. Henry cleared his throat, breaking the moment as she handed him the container. "Thank you, Emma." "You're welcome, Henry." As he turned to leave, she added playfully, "You know, you keep coming back, people might start thinking you enjoy my cooking." This time, his lips did curve. Not fully, not carelessly, but enough to make her breath hitch. "Perhaps I do." The visits became routine after that. Every evening around 6:30, as the city emptied out its exhausted professionals, Henry appeared like clockwork. Emma pretended not to notice how much she started anticipating that time. Pretended not to spend a little extra care chopping the garlic. And pretended not to arrange her little food cart just a little neater. And Henry, he pretended too. Pretended he wasn't timing his meetings to end precisely so he could make it to her cart. Pretended he wasn't memorizing the way her eyes sparkled when she teased him. Pretended he wasn't falling for a woman who didn't even know his last name. But every night the pull between them grew stronger. And every night Henry left knowing that this secret couldn't stay hidden forever. Because eventually Emma would discover that he wasn't just some office worker. He was Henry Brooks, CEO of Brooks Industries, one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the city. And the moment she knew, it could destroy everything. But for now, he let himself have this. A few stolen nights, a few shared meals, and a connection that felt, for the first time in his life, real. Chapter 3. A Recipe for Courage. For most people, Henry Brooks's world was made of glass and steel, cold boardrooms, ruthless negotiations, wealth that solved problems before they ever appeared. But with Emma, everything was different. Here, under the faded umbrella of her tiny food cart, his suit didn't matter. His empire didn't follow him here. He was just Henry. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he craved this version of himself more and more. It was a Friday afternoon when Henry's assistant, Marissa, stepped into his office, carrying a stack of papers and a small flyer clipped to the top. "Mr. Brooks, these are the community partnership proposals you requested." And she hesitated, placing the flyer gently in front of him. This was attached to one of the local vendor packets. Henry barely glanced at it. "Leave it." "Yes, sir." Marissa exited silently. He continued scanning the business reports out of habit, but his eyes kept drifting back to the flyer. National Street Food Competition. Show your passion. Win $50,000, 0 cents, and full culinary mentorship. His thumb traced the corner of the glossy paper. $50,000. For him it was nothing, barely an afterthought on a balance sheet, but for someone like Emma? Henry leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. This could change her life. This could build her dream. This could finally take her off this cold street corner. And without fully understanding why, Henry smiled. He knew exactly what he was going to do. That evening, as usual, he arrived at her cart right on time. Emma greeted him with her usual teasing grin. "Mr. Fancy Tie, I was starting to worry you'd finally learned how to cook." "Highly unlikely," Henry replied, voice smooth. "I'd never recover from the culinary humiliation." She laughed and quickly prepared his usual. Tonight, the rain held back for once and the spring air was gentle. The streetlights cast a soft glow, turning the small patch of pavement into something almost magical. When she handed him his container, he didn't immediately step aside like usual. Instead, he stayed, lingering, his fingers brushing hers, just slightly longer than necessary. She looked up, sensing the shift in his voice. "Yes? I came across something today." He pulled the flyer from his coat pocket and placed it gently on her cart, and her eyes skimmed over it. "National Street Food Competition," she read aloud, brow furrowing. $50,000? Culinary mentorship? He nodded. "I thought of you the moment I saw it." Emma's face tensed, and for a moment Henry saw the war flash behind her eyes, hope battling with fear. "I don't know," she whispered. "That's for real chefs, with restaurants, experience. I've never even set foot in a culinary school." "You don't need a degree to have talent," Henry said gently. "Your food speaks for itself." She shook her head, voice tight. "You don't get it, Henry. I serve egg and rice. Nothing fancy, just simple comfort food." "And that's exactly why you belong there," Henry countered, his voice a little firmer now. "Because you cook with soul. That's something most of those so-called professionals have forgotten." Emma swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the flyer again. Her dream sat on that paper, so close, so terrifying. Henry lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer. "You told me once you dreamed of opening a restaurant. This could be the first step." She smiled sadly. "Dreaming's easy when you don't have anything to lose." Henry's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that she had him, that he could fund her dream 10 times over without blinking. But that would mean revealing who he really was, and he wasn't ready for that, not yet. Instead, he softened his voice again. "Emma, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing it anyway." Her eyes met his, wide, vulnerable. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to say yes. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The flyer sat on her nightstand, glowing softly under the moonlight streaming through the tiny apartment window. Sophia was already asleep in the bed across the room, breathing steady and peaceful, unaware that her sister's heart was pounding beneath the weight of an impossible decision. Emma bit her lip, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. What if I fail? What if they humiliate me? What if I'm not enough? But then, beneath the storm of her doubt, Henry's voice echoed. Courage is doing it anyway. And somewhere deep inside, that seed began to grow. 2 days later, Emma handed Henry his usual plate, but this time with a tremble in her fingers. Henry noticed immediately. "Emma?" She exhaled slowly, then smiled. "I signed up." Henry's chest swelled, pride radiating through him like quiet electricity. "I knew you would," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think." Emma laughed nervously. "If I embarrass myself on national TV, I'll send you the therapy bill." He leaned slightly forward, voice warm. "I'll happily pay for it, but you won't need it." Their eyes lingered on each other for a moment longer than they should have. And for the first time since they met, Emma allowed herself to wonder, really wonder, who this man was standing before her. Because no one had ever believed in her like this. Not even herself. As the days passed, Henry continued showing up like clockwork. But now, there was something different between them. An invisible thread pulling tighter with every conversation, every shared joke, every lingering glance. Henry helped her research recipes, refine her presentation, even offered to be her taste tester. Always under the guise of scientific observation, of course. But beneath it all, Henry knew he wasn't just helping her win a competition. He was falling for her. And he also knew the longer he waited to tell her who he really was, the harder it would be to risk losing her when the truth came out. Chapter 4. Judgment Served Cold. The Seattle Convention Center buzzed like a hive on the morning of the competition. Bright camera lights reflected off the polished marble floors. Production assistants with clipboards rushed back and forth, shouting directions into headsets. Vendors wheeled in carts of exotic ingredients: lobster tails, truffle oils, saffron, racks of imported spices labeled in languages Emma couldn't even read. She stood at the edge of the chaos, frozen for a moment. Her tiny folding cart looked like a child's toy compared to the stainless steel cooking stations surrounding her. Chefs in pristine uniforms moved with sharp mechanical confidence, like they'd done this 100 times before. Emma swallowed hard and gripped the handle of her cart tighter, forcing herself forward. "Don't back out. Not now. Not after everything." The contestant Emma Martinez, a woman with a clipboard, called. "Yes, that's me." Station 7, right between Chef Dubois and Chef Ashford. Emma blinked. Those names rang bells. Michelin-trained, TV-featured, the kind of chefs who spent more on their knives than she earned in a month. The woman smiled politely but with clear skepticism. Good luck. By the time Emma rolled her little cart into place, both chefs on either side were already unpacked. On her left, Marcel Dubois, French accent, hipster beard, custom-embroidered apron, barely glanced at her. On her right, Victoria Ashford, sleek, blonde, Clinical Institute of America graduate, offered a tight-lipped smile before going back to organizing her gleaming collection of copper pans. Emma exhaled, setting her small griddle on the wobbly table. She didn't have time to feel small. The lights above flickered as the host's booming voice filled the hall. "Welcome to the National Street Food Competition." The audience roared, cameras swung in every direction, the judges filed into their seats. Amanda Sterling, the warm but sharp-tongued celebrity chef. Robert Chen, the analytical food critic. And finally, Julian Moreau. The moment Emma's eyes landed on Julian, her stomach tightened. Julian Moreau, the French chef, the destroyer of dreams. She knew his reputation: brilliant, ruthless, condescending. He was famous for cutting contestants apart before ever tasting a bite. And now he was staring directly at her. "Chefs," the host announced, "you have 2 hours. Begin." The room erupted into motion. Blowtorches hissed, sous chefs barked commands, flames leapt into the air, stainless steel clanged. Emma took one long breath, reached for her garlic, and whispered to herself, "Just like home." She began chopping with steady rhythm, the familiar scent rising immediately, grounding her. This wasn't about competing with fancy sauces or molecular gastronomy. This was about feeding souls. As the clock ticked, her confidence grew, until she felt his presence behind her. Julian Moreau was standing just a few feet away, hands behind his back, watching her movements like a scientist observing a lab rat. She tried to ignore him, focusing on her rice as it sizzled perfectly against the griddle. Julian finally spoke, voice dripping with condescension. Rice and egg. Emma froze for just a second before replying. Yes, chef. That's your competition entry? Yes. His mouth twisted. Even a child can make that. Emma's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. Not like this. Julian chuckled. We'll see. He walked off without another word, his tailored suit brushing past her like an executioner's robe. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Henry in the audience. He sat toward the back, far from the cameras, but his eyes never left her. When their gazes met, he gave a subtle nod. Steady, quiet, full of silent encouragement. You can do this. Emma inhaled deeply, refocusing. She poured her chilled rice onto the griddle. Each grain danced in the oil, separate, light, exactly the way it was supposed to. The fragrance filled the air like a comforting embrace. Relax, Emma, she whispered. You've cooked this 1,000 times. The garlic turned golden, the onions caramelized. The soy sauce hissed against the heat. The egg cracked into the center, like a tiny sunrise. With 10 minutes left, plates began landing on the judges' table. Dishes plated like artwork, towers of seafood balanced precariously, sauces painted in perfect brushstrokes. When it was her turn, Emma walked forward slowly. Her plates were simple, no garnish, no towering structure, just perfectly cooked egg and rice. The audience fell quieter, as if collectively doubting whether her dish even belonged among the others. Amanda Sterling leaned forward curiously. Robert Chen examined the plate like a puzzle. Julian barely hid his smirk. What do you call this? Amanda asked. Fried rice with egg, Chef said softly. Made with love. Julian's eyebrow twitched at her answer. Amanda was the first to taste. The moment the fork touched her lips, her expression shifted. Her eyes softened. She whispered. There's something emotional here. Robert followed. He took a small bite, closed his eyes for a long moment, and then nodded. Surprisingly layered, balanced seasoning. The garlic hits first, but then there's a warmth that lingers. Then came Julian. He stabbed the rice with his fork as if annoyed by its simplicity. He tasted. And for one long breath, one heartbeat, he said nothing. His jaw worked slowly. His brow furrowed. His eyes flicked briefly toward Emma. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. It's adequate. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Amanda frowned, but Robert glanced at Julian with visible irritation. Amanda spoke again. Your technique is clean, Emma. More importantly, your dish feels honest. I can taste who you are. Emma's throat tightened. Julian cleared his throat, dismissing the conversation as quickly as possible. Next contestant, he barked, waving them forward. Back at her station, Emma finally let her nerves hit her. Her hands shook as she wiped down the counter. Suddenly, a voice whispered softly behind her. You were brilliant. Henry. She turned toward him. You shouldn't be back here. Security didn't try that hard, he joked gently, his voice warm. I had to tell you in person. Emma's throat swelled with unexpected emotion. I feel like I embarrassed myself, she admitted. Everyone else made these masterpieces. Henry shook his head. No, they made sculptures. You made food. Food that means something. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. You're stronger than you realize, Emma. And you belong here. Don't let anyone, not even some French culinary robot, tell you otherwise. She laughed, wiping her cheeks. Culinary robot, I like that. Henry's smile softened, and for a moment, his hand hovered near hers, before pulling back. The unspoken electricity between them was getting harder and harder to ignore. Go home, rest, Henry whispered. Whatever happens, you were extraordinary today. And for the first time since arriving at the convention center, Emma allowed herself to believe it might be true. Chapter 5, The Comeback Dish. The hotel room was too quiet, too clean, too suffocating. Emma sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, her fingers tightly gripping the folds of the competition flyer she had once clung to with hope. Now it just felt like paper. She had replayed Julian's cold, dismissive words at least 100 times since the judging round. Even a child can make that. This is a national competition. Go back to your little street cart. Every syllable echoed, sharper each time. The humiliation clung to her like wet clothes. She had tried to be brave. She had dared to believe. And for what? To stand in front of cameras and be mocked? A soft knock interrupted the spiral. Henry. She didn't move. You shouldn't be here. His voice came gently through the door. Open the door. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But her shame kept her frozen. Another pause. Then his voice, softer. You fought too hard to hide in this room now. Her defenses cracked. She stood slowly and opened the door. Henry stepped inside quietly, closing it behind him as if shutting out the rest of the world. The sight of him made her chest tighten. He wore no suit tonight. Just a simple, dark sweater and jeans. No armor, no CEO mask. Just Henry. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, intimate. Finally, Emma broke it. I made a fool of myself. No, Henry replied, stepping closer. You didn't. She let out a hollow laugh. Julian certainly thinks I did. Henry's jaw flexed. Julian's an arrogant fool who's forgotten what real food is. Tears burned behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry again. Not in front of him. Not after how strong she'd tried to be. But Henry reached for her hand, his voice thick now, pulling her back to herself. Emma, listen to me. Your food doesn't need foam or fancy plating or imported sea salt flown in from God knows where. He leaned closer, his voice low and warm. When I eat your rice and egg, it feels like coming home. You serve something most chefs will never understand. Comfort, safety, love. Her breath caught in her throat. And then the words slipped from him, almost like a confession. I need that. I need you. The air between them shifted, almost trembling. But before either of them could say more, Emma's chin lifted, her eyes narrowing with a strange clarity. Something had shifted inside her. No, she whispered, not like this. Henry blinked, confused. What do you mean? I'm not going to hide up here and let him humiliate me without even tasting my food. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I let Julian dismiss me. I let him look down on me. I won't let him erase me. Henry stared at her, a smile slowly forming. Not amused, but proud. Deeply proud. There she is, he whispered. Emma inhaled sharply and grabbed her coat. Come on. Back inside the competition hall, the judges were preparing to leave when Emma marched back in, her shoulders squared like armor. The cameras quickly pivoted toward her. Excuse me, she said loudly, her voice steady and slicing through the room's murmurs. The head producer looked panicked. Miss Martinez, the judging round has concluded. I'm not here to cook. I'm here to ask something. She locked eyes with Julian. The French chef looked mildly annoyed, waving his hand dismissively. We've already... Did you taste it? Emma interrupted sharply. Julian paused. Pardon? My dish, Emma repeated, taking a step closer. Did you taste it before deciding it was beneath you? The entire room stilled. Even Amanda and Robert leaned forward, clearly fascinated. Julian's face twitched. I did not need to. I can tell by looking at it what level it's at. Emma's jaw tightened. So you judge my food without even tasting it, without respecting what I brought here, without honoring what this competition is supposed to be about. The tension in the room thickened. The cameras zoomed in. Amanda Sterling finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. She has a point, Julian. Robert nodded in agreement. At least give it a fair taste. Julian let out a heavy sigh, his pride visibly wounded. But under the pressure of the moment, with the audience watching, he finally relented. He reached for a fork and took a small bite. The silence that followed was agonizing. Julian chewed slowly, his brow furrowing. He took another bite, longer this time, as if trying to hide his own surprise. Finally, he exhaled. Mon Dieu. Emma held her breath. Julian set the fork down carefully and looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. It's not simple after all. Amanda smiled, her eyes softening. That's called soul, Julian. Robert added gently. It's comfort, and it's quite brilliant. The audience erupted in applause. As Emma stepped back from the table, Henry stood nearby, his chest tight, his heart full. When she reached him, she exhaled shakily, overwhelmed, tears threatening again. But this time, for a different reason. "You did it," Henry whispered. Her voice broke softly. "I didn't let him erase me." Without thinking, Henry pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly, protectively. She melted into him, allowing herself this one stolen moment of safety. And for the first time since her mother died, Emma felt like she could finally breathe. Chapter 6. The Rising Flame. The world outside her cart hadn't changed much. Same city, same drizzle, same hurried crowds brushing past her every morning, too busy to look her way. But inside Emma, something had shifted. The moment at the competition, when Julian finally tasted her dish, when the judges spoke words she never imagined she'd hear, left a quiet fire burning inside her. Not just validation, not just survival, but hope. Real hope. Every evening after the competition, Henry still came. As always, he arrived right at 6:30, as if the city itself had programmed his steps to match her schedule. But there was something different now, something neither of them had dared to fully name yet. It lived in the space between their glances, in the way his hand lingered slightly too long when taking his container, in the gentle way he watched her work, memorizing every movement of her hands as she tossed garlic and rice into the sizzling griddle, and in the soft, nervous glimmer in her chest every time she saw him. That Tuesday evening, Henry arrived carrying a brown paper bag. "What's this?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. "Supplies." His voice was casual, but his eyes twinkled. "Imported sesame oil, better soy sauce, a few spices I thought you might enjoy experimenting with." Emma stared at the contents, touched in a way she hadn't prepared for. "Henry, you didn't need to." "I wanted to," he said it simply. And for the first time, she let herself smile without caution, without walls. "All right," she grinned. "Let's see if your fancy spices can handle my grandma's recipe." The next hour unfolded like a quiet symphony. Henry stayed close, watching as Emma adjusted her usual ratios, carefully adding a hint of the imported sesame oil to the rice. The aroma that rose was heavenly, richer, deeper, like a childhood memory carried on a breeze. "You're really good at this," Henry murmured, his voice more intimate tonight. "You cook like you're not just feeding people, like you're feeding something inside them." Emma's hands paused for a moment as his words soaked in. She glanced at him. "I learned from my grandmother," she said softly. "She always told me, food isn't about showing off. It's about making people feel safe again." Henry swallowed, his chest tightened. Because that's exactly what she'd done to him, made him feel safe. In a world where everyone wanted his power, his name, his wealth, she saw none of that. She had no idea who he really was. And that made everything so much more dangerous. Later that night, after the last customer left, Emma began wiping down the cart while Henry lingered nearby, unwilling to leave yet. The street was quiet. The drizzle had finally stopped, leaving the pavement shiny under the lamplight. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said suddenly. Henry straightened slightly, trying not to show his nerves. "Of course. Why do you come back?" The question hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament. She wasn't teasing this time. She was searching. Vulnerable. Henry took a long breath. "Because I'm falling for you. Because you've woken something inside me I thought was dead. Because I don't want to leave. Because when I'm here, I'm not the man everyone thinks I am." He said none of those things. Instead, he offered a gentler truth. "Because here, I feel like I can finally breathe." Emma's lips parted slightly, her breath catching. She hadn't expected that answer. And yet, it was exactly what she felt too. She nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I feel that too." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, electric, not heavy like tension, but full of something unsaid. Henry reached out slowly, almost testing the invisible boundary between them. His hand brushed gently against her wrist, a barely there touch, as if he were asking permission to be closer. Emma didn't pull away. Her pulse quickened, and for one heartbeat she thought, this could be real. This could be something. But the distant sound of tires splashing through a nearby puddle broke the moment. She cleared her throat, stepping back slightly. You, better get going. Big day tomorrow. Henry smiled softly, respecting her retreat. Same time tomorrow? Of course. He hesitated for 1 second longer before turning and walking away. And Emma stood there, heart pounding, watching him disappear into the quiet street. That night, Sophia found her sitting on the apartment balcony under a faded blanket, staring at the skyline. You're falling for him. Emma startled slightly, her cheeks flushing. What? Emma Smith. Sophia's voice was soft, full of sisterly mischief and love. You're glowing like a light bulb. Emma sighed, burying her face into her hands. I don't know what's happening. Sophia sat beside her, pulling part of the blanket over herself. Is he a good man? She asked gently. Emma stared ahead, searching for words. Yes, she whispered. I think he might be one of the best. Sophia smiled, nudging her shoulder. Then stop overthinking it. It's not that simple. Why not? Emma hesitated. She didn't have the words for it yet. Because there was a storm inside her. A hope she didn't know if she could trust. And a strange fear she couldn't explain. But deep down, Henry was carrying a fear of his own. Because with every passing day, with every moment he spent falling deeper for her, he knew the truth. He was lying. Not with words, but with omission. And when she found out who he really was, Henry Brooks, CEO of Brooks Industries, she might never forgive him. Even if everything he felt for her was real. Chapter 7. Final Showdown Under the Spotlight. The morning of the final round arrived like a punch to the gut. Emma stood in front of the Seattle Pier 70 competition arena, clutching her small cart handle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The entire pier had been transformed. Bright banners rippled in the wind. Enormous cameras hovered like vultures, and producers barked into headsets as if organizing a military operation. Across the massive stage, high-end food trucks gleamed under studio lights, custom-built kitchens on wheels, polished stainless steel, sous chefs darting in and out like clockwork. And there she stood, with her beat-up cart, peeling paint, uneven wheels, and a tiny griddle that looked laughable next to the towering equipment surrounding her. What am I doing here? Her hands trembled as she wiped down her counter for the third time, her nerves screaming. Henry's voice played in her head again. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing it anyway. And then, as if summoned, he appeared. Not from the cameras, not from the press, quietly, from the far side of the arena. He wore no suit this morning, just a simple jacket, blending into the crew, unnoticed by most, but not by her. Their eyes met, and with one small nod, Henry anchored her again. He didn't mouth words. He didn't need to. She could hear him anyway. You belong here. The host's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Street Food Championship Finals. The crowd roared. Cameras panned across the 10 remaining contestants. Each one stood behind their professional-grade equipment, polished, pristine, already assembling exotic ingredients on gleaming counters. And then there was Emma, standing in her tiny corner, completely outmatched, at least in appearance. But this time, the weight in her chest felt different. Less like fear, more like fight. The timer started. 2 hours, 1 chance. As soon as the horn blared, chaos exploded around her. 2 chefs barked orders, flames shot skyward, food processors whirred, lobsters clacked inside metal bowls. Emma ignored it all. She wasn't here to impress them with molecular gastronomy. She was here to serve what she knew best: soul food. She moved with quiet focus. Her grandmother's recipe lived in her hands now. Garlic first, golden, fragrant. Onions caramelized just right, not rushed, not bitter. Her rice hit the griddle in soft, careful waves, every grain separate, every motion practiced. The smell drifted outward, rich, warm, like childhood memories in late-night kitchen laughter. Several people nearby stopped what they were doing, their heads turning instinctively toward the familiar aroma. Even a few competitors paused briefly before snapping themselves back into their complex routines. Julian Morrow watched from the judge's table, arms crossed, brow furrowed, studying her every move. He didn't look smug this time. He looked curious, perhaps even slightly concerned. Amanda Sterling smiled softly, whispering something to Robert Chen. The two nodded in quiet agreement. There was something happening at Station 7. Something the cameras couldn't quite capture, but everyone could feel. At the 90-minute mark, disaster struck. Emma's portable gas tank sputtered. The flame under her griddle flickered, threatening to die. Panic gripped her throat for one terrifying second. Not now. Please, not now. She quickly dropped to her knees, checking the hose connection, but it was beyond her skill to repair. And that's when she heard him. Emma. Her head whipped toward the side gate, and there was Henry, holding a spare gas tank in his arms, breathless. Security moved toward him instantly, blocking his path. "You can't come in here, sir." "It's an emergency," Henry shouted. "Her fuel line's failing." The cameras swung toward them, the crowd buzzing, the host hesitating for a moment before throwing his hands up with dramatic flair. "Well, folks, it looks like we have a culinary rescue attempt unfolding live." The audience cheered as Henry, somehow managing to dodge the guards, jumped the barricade with surprising grace for a man who usually lived behind conference tables. He reached her station, gently set the new tank down, and within seconds replaced the faulty line with steady, practiced hands. The flame roared back to life. Emma stared at him, her chest heaving, overwhelmed. "You're insane." He grinned. Completely. Their eyes held for one heartbeat too long before security finally escorted Henry out. But not before the crowd gave him a round of applause. Emma wiped her eyes quickly and whispered to herself, "Back to work." For the next hour, she entered a zone she didn't even know existed inside her. The rice absorbed the precise balance of soy sauce and sesame oil. The eggs cracked perfectly into the well she formed in the center. She folded the mixture together with gentle, practiced turns. Not rushing, not forcing. The dish was alive, breathing in rhythm with her heart. As the final horn blared, Emma plated her simple dish onto 3 white plates. No garnish, no foam, no edible flowers. Just rice, egg, and years of quiet pain turned into love. She placed the plates before the judges and stepped back. Julian stared at his portion for several seconds before picking up his fork. Amanda and Robert followed. The moment the first bite touched their lips, everything else stopped. The audience leaned forward, collectively. The camera zoomed in, and for a brief moment the world belonged only to that bite of food. Amanda wiped the corner of her eye. "There's history here." Robert nodded slowly, "and comfort." Even Julian took a second bite, then a third. His voice, when it finally came, was quieter than anyone expected. "This is what food is supposed to be." He looked up at Emma, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only reluctant, honest respect. "You cook not from technique," Julian continued, "but from intention." Emma's breath trembled. Her knees almost buckled. Henry, watching from the back, clenched his fists, holding back his own emotions. Pride, relief, and something deeper he still wasn't brave enough to fully name. The host stepped forward with theatrical drama. "And now, the moment you've all been waiting for." The screen behind them displayed each contestant's name, the tension rising with each dramatic pause. The winner of this year's National Street Food Championship, Emma Martinez. The arena exploded into cheers. Confetti rained from the rafters, cameras flashed. Emma covered her mouth, tears breaking free. The judges stood and applauded as Amanda presented the oversized check and the mentorship contract. The prize money, the culinary backing, everything she had fought for. And yet, even with her dreams finally unfolding, her eyes searched for only one person. And there, still standing near the back, was Henry. Silent, smiling, eyes shining. Their gazes locked across the distance. And though the cameras couldn't hear it, in that moment she whispered, "Thank you." Chapter 8. The Truth Unfolds. The celebration stretched into the evening, but for Emma everything blurred. The interviews, the flashing lights, the microphone shoved in her face. The words she couldn't believe she was saying. I still feel like I'm dreaming. This is for my sister, for my grandmother, for every small vendor who ever wondered if they were enough. He tells her her sons tremble. But behind every word, her heart kept searching the crowd. For him, for Henry. And when their eyes met again, across the chaos, she saw something there. Something proud, but guarded, as if he knew something she didn't. The reporters wouldn't stop. Emma, how does it feel to beat Michelin-starred chefs with just rice and egg? Emma, who inspired your cooking? Emma, what's next for your career? And then, the question that shifted everything. One reporter stepped forward, her voice sharper than the others. Emma, many viewers are curious, how did you and CEO Henry Brooks meet? The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, Emma thought she had misheard. CEO? Henry? CEO Henry Brooks? Her body went cold. I'm sorry, she stammered, blinking rapidly. What? The reporter smiled, clearly sensing blood. CEO Henry Brooks, Brooks Industries, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. You've been seen together frequently. Was your relationship connected to business? The crowd buzzed. Camera zoomed in. Lights flashed, hotter. Hey. Emma turned her head toward Henry, but he wasn't smiling now. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and his eyes desperate. Emma, he started softly. The world around them faded. Brooks Industries. CEO. Wealth beyond anything she ever imagined. Emma's hands trembled. She couldn't feel the check in her hands anymore. The stage beneath her feet tilted like she might collapse. She forced her voice out, barely audible. You're the CEO? Henry stepped forward, pleading. Emma, please, let me explain. But she wasn't hearing him. Not anymore. The words spilled out on their own. You told me, administration. You said you handled contracts. I didn't lie, he whispered. I do handle contracts, all of them, the entire company. You let me believe you were just another office worker. She cut in, her voice breaking. You let me fall for someone who didn't exist. The audience murmured around them, unsure whether they were witnessing gossip or heartbreak. I needed you to see me, Henry said, his voice urgent, almost desperate. Not my bank account, not my title. And you didn't give me the chance to decide for myself. Tears finally broke free, sliding down her cheeks. I trusted you, she whispered. I trusted you because you were the one person who made me feel safe. Henry's voice cracked. Emma, everything I felt was real. She shook her head, unable to breathe through the pain swelling inside her. Then why start with a lie? Henry swallowed hard, his hands falling helplessly to his sides. Because I've been lied to my whole life. People only see the money, the power, the man on Forbes lists. They don't see me. His voice broke fully now. But you did. For the first time, someone saw me. Not Brooks Industries, not CEO Henry Brooks, just Henry. Emma stared at him, her chest heaving, the tears blurring his face as she whispered, Then you should have trusted me. The pain was too much, the betrayal too sharp, and she did the only thing she could do to breathe again. She stepped away. The cameras kept rolling. The crowd whispered. The celebration became suffocating. Emma, please, he whispered again. But she was already turning, already leaving the stage, already walking away from the one person who had given her hope and broken it in the same breath. She barely remembered getting into the taxi, barely remembered Sophia's worried face when she walked into their apartment. Only the hollow ache inside her remained. Sophia tried to console her, sitting beside her on the worn couch. He made a mistake, a stupid one, yes, but look at everything he's done for you. Emma shook her head, her voice cracking. I don't know who he is anymore. I don't know if I ever did. But you do know, Sophia said softly. You know how he looks at you. That was never fake. Emma wiped her face, exhausted. That doesn't change the fact that he chose to lie. Sophia didn't argue. She simply placed a hand over Emma's and whispered, Then you'll have to decide what matters most, the lie that started it or the truth you built together after. And yet, for the first time since the competition, Emma lay awake that night, not from fear, not from excitement, but from heartbreak. Because she missed him. Terribly. Deeply. More than she was ready to admit. And that, perhaps, was the most painful betrayal of all. Chapter 9. A Restaurant, a Hole in My Heart. 2 months later, the soft glow of sunrise bathed the small storefront on Capitol Hill in pale golden light. The hand-painted sign above the glass door read simply, "Grace and Love." Emma stood outside, keys trembling in her hand, staring at the door that led to her new world. The restaurant was everything she had once dared to imagine during long rainy nights at the food cart. Small, cozy, warm. 12 tables, exposed brick walls, an open kitchen where she could cook, just like she always had. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sophia stood beside her, practically bouncing with excitement. "Come on," she whispered. "It's yours, Em." Emma smiled, but her chest ached. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The first week flew by like a dream. Crowds packed the small space from the moment she opened. Customers came from all over. Locals, food critics, even tourists who had seen her tearful victory broadcast across national television. The reservations booked out for weeks. Social media buzzed with viral headlines. The girl who beat gourmet chefs with just rice and egg. Street vendor turned rising culinary star. Comfort food queen of Seattle. Everywhere she looked, people were smiling, eating, laughing, sharing plates filled with the simple food she had once served on a rainy street corner. And yet, every night when she locked the doors, wiped the counters, and turned off the lights, she felt it. The emptiness. A quiet hole where Henry's voice used to live. The money from the competition prize had covered part of the renovations. But what truly surprised her was the anonymous investor who came forward weeks earlier, offering to cover the remaining startup costs, licenses, and equipment. No interest, ownership, no strings. At first, she thought it was a scam. But when the lawyers confirmed everything was legitimate, she had accepted it, reluctantly, knowing this restaurant might never exist otherwise. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she suspected who was behind it, even if she didn't want to face that truth. One quiet morning, Sophia cornered her at the counter while prepping ingredients. "You know it's him, right?" she said softly. Emma didn't look up from the chopping board. No contracts, no name, just anonymous investor. Sophia leaned in. "Who else would do that for you?" Emma swallowed hard. "I don't want to talk about it." "You miss him." Her knife paused mid-slice. Tears threatened her vision, but she blinked them back. "I miss who I thought he was." Sophia's voice softened. "No, Em, you miss who he really is. You always knew that part. It's why you fell in love." And that was the cruel part. It wasn't that she hated him. It was that she still loved him. Even after everything. Even after the lie. Nights grew heavier. She would stand behind the open kitchen window, quietly watching couples fill the tables, laughing, sharing bites across plates of golden fried rice and perfectly cooked eggs. She'd hear them say, "It tastes like home. It's simple but perfect. It feels like a hug." Exactly what Henry had told her once. And every time, it tightened the hollow space inside her chest. One rainy afternoon, as the dinner rush slowed, the doorbell chimed. Emma looked up instinctively, always searching, even when she told herself not to. But it wasn't him. It was the restaurant's accountant dropping off monthly statements. He handed her a manila folder and paused before leaving. "Oh, one more thing," he added. "You should know your anonymous investor renewed the equipment lease for another year." Emma's breath caught. She nodded stiffly. "Thank you." The accountant left, and she stood there, staring at the folder. It was him. Of course it was him. Still silently standing behind her dreams, like a ghost that wouldn't leave. Helping. Always helping. Even when she couldn't bear to see him. That night, Sophia sat across from her in the empty dining room after closing, watching her sisters struggle. "Maybe it's time to let him explain," Sophia said gently. "You don't know what he might say." Emma stared at her half-empty tea mug. "I know exactly what he'll say." Sophia reached across the table, covering Emma's hand with her own. "But do you know what she'll say back?" The hardest part wasn't the lie. It wasn't the betrayal. It was how much she still cared. How even after everything, the man who stood across that food cart night after night, who quietly believed in her before she believed in herself, still lived inside her heart. And no matter how successful Rice and Love became, the hole remained. Chapter 10. The Return of Love. The morning air was crisp when Emma unlocked the front door of Rice and Love as usual. Same routine. Same small bell above the door. Same way the morning light filtered through the windows and caught the edges of the polished tables. But something was different today. Something she couldn't name. An energy she hadn't felt in months. She shook it off and moved behind the counter, her body running on muscle memory as she chopped garlic, prepared the rice, and double-checked reservations. Sophia arrived a little later, humming softly while organizing the clean silverware. "Big day?" she asked casually. "Fully booked again." Emma offered a soft smile. "Every table." Sophia studied her sister for a moment. "You look nervous." Emma gave a light laugh, brushing it off. "I'm always nervous." But she wasn't nervous because of the restaurant. Her heart had been heavy all morning. Something was coming. She could feel it. At noon, as the first customers began filling the tables, the bell above the door rang again. Emma glanced up from the kitchen window, and her heart stopped. Henri, standing there holding nothing but a nervous smile. No tailored suit, no expensive watch, no perfectly pressed coat, just jeans, a simple sweater, and the man she had both loved and lost. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sophia, ever the quiet accomplice, whispered, "I'm going to check the storage room," and vanished into the back. The restaurant noise blurred around them. It was just the two of them now. Henry stepped closer to the counter. "Hi," he said softly. Emma swallowed, forcing air into her lungs. "Hi." He glanced around the restaurant with quiet awe. "It's beautiful, exactly how you always described it." Emma's voice was steady, but her hands shook beneath the counter. "Why are you here, Henry?" He looked down for a moment, gathering himself. "I don't know how to stay away anymore." She said nothing. Henry's voice trembled as he continued. "These past few months, I kept hoping you were happy. I watched from a distance. The restaurant, the articles, the reviews. You deserve every single one of them." Emma's throat tightened. "And yet you still kept helping." He smiled faintly. "I wasn't going to let money stand between you and your dream, not when I had the means to make sure you didn't have to struggle for it. But you still hid." His expression darkened with regret. "I didn't know how to come back after what I did, after I broke your trust." Silence pulsed between them. The weight of everything unsaid hung heavy in the air. Finally, Henry leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper now. "I came here today not as CEO Henry Brooks. Not as an investor, not as someone trying to fix things with money." He paused. "I came as the man who still wakes up every morning thinking about the way you cook rice and eggs with more care than most people put into their entire lives." Her lips trembled. His voice broke. "I'm not here for anything, except to ask for a chance to start over." The lump in Emma's throat grew too thick to swallow. Her heart was breaking open all over again, but this time not with pain. With something gentler, because the man standing in front of her wasn't the man who once hid behind a lie. He was the man who had quietly loved her the whole time. The man who jumped security lines carrying a gas tank for her. The man who came back, even when it risked everything. Emma finally spoke, her voice raw but steady. "You broke my heart." "I know," he whispered, "and I hate myself for it. You made me question everything I believed about you. I deserve that." She paused, breathing deeply. "And yet, you never stopped believing in me." He looked up slowly, hope flickering behind his tired eyes. "Because I never stopped loving you." Emma exhaled. Then she smiled softly. "Then prove it." His brow furrowed. "How?" "Start at the bottom. No suits, no power, no hiding." Henry blinked, stunned for a moment, before his face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the night everything fell apart. "Dishwasher position still open?" he asked playfully. Emma laughed through the tears that now freely spilled. "If you can handle the pressure." He reached across the counter, taking her hand gently in his for the first time in months. "I'll be the best dishwasher you've ever hired." They both laughed. But behind the laughter was something much deeper. Forgiveness, healing, and a love that had finally learned how to stand without lies. 3 months later, on a quiet Thursday night, Henry stood nervously at the center of Rice and Love. The restaurant had closed early. The lights had dimmed. The tables had been cleared. And at one table in the middle of the room sat Emma, wearing a simple dress, her eyes shining with a soft glow that still made Henry's chest ache. He stepped forward, heart pounding harder than any business deal he'd ever faced. In his hands was a small velvet box. On the table were 2 plates, fried rice and egg, exactly like the very first meal that started it all. Henry knelt slowly before her. "You taught me that the simplest things, like rice and egg, can hold the most powerful flavors when made with love." He opened the box, revealing the ring. "You taught me that real love doesn't need lies or titles or bank accounts, just truth." He smiled softly. "Emma Martinez, will you marry me?" Tears streamed freely down Emma's face now as she nodded. "Yes." She laughed through her tears. "But only if you promise to keep eating my rice and egg for the rest of your life." Henry's voice broke as he whispered, "Every single day." And as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the room filled with a quiet kind of joy neither of them had ever known before. The kind that grows when 2 broken hearts finally choose to heal together, forever seasoned with love. 6 months later, on a quiet beach in Maui, the wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. The waves whispered along the shoreline as soft music drifted across the sand. Under a small, white arch wrapped in pale silk ribbons, Emma stood barefoot, the hem of her simple dress fluttering around her ankles. The morning light painted everything in a soft gold. Her hair, her smile, the tears in her eyes. At the end of the aisle stood Henry, waiting, wearing a light linen suit, his hands trembling, his eyes never leaving her. Around them sat only the people who mattered. Sophia holding a bouquet, her face glowing with pride. Grandma Eleno, flown in with the help of Henry's private jet, sitting wrapped in a shawl, misty-eyed but smiling like she'd always known this day would come. A few close friends, staff from Rice and Love, and the quiet waves acting as the final guest. As Emma reached him, Henry gently took her hands, his voice thick with emotion. "You're more beautiful than I ever deserved," he whispered. Emma smiled through her tears. "And you're exactly the man I always believed you could be." The priest's voice carried softly in the breeze as he asked them to exchange vows. Henry spoke first, his voice breaking. "I spent my life building walls. Tall, cold, lonely walls, until you pulled me out of them with nothing but a plate of rice and egg. You taught me how to love with nothing but truth. And I promise, for as long as I breathe, I will love you simply, honestly, and completely." Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. "I was never looking for a man with money or power. I only ever wanted someone who saw me, really saw me, and you did. Even when you were hiding, your heart never lied. I promise to love you as we are, imperfect, healing, and real." When the priest finally spoke the words, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the world seemed to pause as they kissed. A kiss full of everything they had been through. The lies, the heartbreak, the forgiveness, the quiet, healing love that finally won. Later that night, back at the restaurant, a small private reception filled Rice and Love with laughter and music. The lights were warm. The plates were full of fried rice and egg, a wedding menu chosen by choice, not by budget. As Emma watched the people she loved filling the space, she rested her head on Henry's shoulder. "Do you realize," she whispered, "this all started because you finally listened to your stomach?" Henry chuckled, holding her closer. "And because you were stubborn enough not to let me walk away hungry." They both smiled as the room glowed around them. Then, leaning in softly, Henry whispered, "You know what the real secret ingredient always was?" Emma smiled, closing her eyes against his chest. "Soul seasoning." And as they swayed quietly to the soft music, Henry whispered one last truth into her ear. The truth that had carried them through every broken moment. Real love flavors everything.